Now we'll see some other ways that we can use iterators. There are a few useful functions that accept iterators as parameters, so let's just go over some of the most common ones. The first is erase. Now the syntax looks a little bit funky, but it follows the same rules that we've always been using for function declarations. We start with a return value, so this function returns an iterator. Then we have the name of the function here in red, erase, and you see these colons. So the colon is the scope resolution operator, which you're familiar with. We use it to identify what class this function is defined in. So here we know that erase is defined within the vector class. And finally, we accept an iterator as input. So what this function does is it removes the element that the given input iterator is currently pointing to. So we can use this function to remove elements from a vector. So if I erase digits.begin, which points to the very first element in the vector, then I'd be left with 1415. You'll also notice that it returns an iterator, which we're actually not using here. The return value is an iterator that points to the element that came after what was just removed. So we just removed 3, so the return value would be an iterator that points to the first 1. The next function we'll talk about is the insert function, also defined within the vector class. It accepts an iterator and a value that we want to insert into the vector. So t here represents the data type of whatever is stored in the vector. So if it's a vector of ints, then t would be int, and if it's a vector of strings, then t would be a string, and so on. So the given input iterator, it indicates where we should insert the new value into the vector, and value will be inserted right before the element that the iterator points to. So if I insert 9, not at the beginning of the vector, but at .begin plus 2, then it would insert 9 into index 2, giving us 319415. So in this case, we also don't use the return value here, but this would return an iterator that points to the new value that we just inserted, so the 9. Finally, we have the standard find function. So this function you can see is not defined within any specific container because we aren't using the colon after like vector. So this just exists within the standard library, which means that we can call this function with the syntax standard : find. So the standard find function allows us to find a value if it exists between first and last. So the two iterators that we're passing in as input, first and last, they effectively act as a range that we're searching within. So if we find the value within that range, then we'll return an iterator pointing to the element that matches value. And if we don't find that value, then the return value is an iterator pointing to wherever the given last iterator points to. So usually we want to search the entire vector. So we would just pass in .begin and .end as input. So we're basically the range of values that we're searching within is the entire vector. So if we're searching for the value 5, this would return an iterator pointing to the element 5.